A tent is not supposed to be a tomb. It is a symbol of shelter, a fragile bastion against the indifference of the wild, a place of warmth and rest. Yet, in the autumn of 2024, high on the receding ice fields of the Frostveil Mountains, a tent became just that, a monument to a 19-year-old question, a silent nylon headstone for 3 people who had simply walked away into nothingness. When glaciologists stumbled upon the faded blue dome, perfectly preserved in the frigid air, they found a scene not of violence or disaster, but of eerie, instantaneous departure. A pot of stew sat on a small camp stove, its contents a frozen, solid mass, forever moments away from being served. Inside, sleeping bags were unrolled, and a paperback novel lay open, its pages stiff with ice. The occupants were gone, and the only thing more disturbing than their absence was the chilling evidence that they had left in a desperate, inexplicable hurry. 19 years prior, in the late summer of 2005, the world of the vanished had been full of life and anticipation. The expedition was the passion project of Aidan Croft, a 32-year-old structural engineer with a seasoned love for mountaineering. He was not a reckless thrill-seeker, but a meticulous planner, a man who found solace in the raw mathematics of rock, ice, and endurance. With him were the 2 most important people in his life: his partner, Lena Petrova, 29, a brilliant cartographer whose maps were as much art as they were science, and her younger sister, Chloe Petrova, a 23-year-old recent university graduate, on her first true alpine adventure. They were not elite climbers attempting an impossible feat. They were simply 3 people in love with the world's quiet places, seeking to stand together on a remote, beautiful summit. Their goal was Mount Boreas, a formidable but achievable peak in the notoriously treacherous Frostveil range. The plan was straightforward, mapped out with Lena's characteristic precision and vetted by Aidan's cautious experience. They would establish a base camp in a sheltered glacial basin before making their final single-day ascent. It was a classic alpine-style climb, relying on speed, efficiency, and a clear weather window. They were well-equipped, well-prepared, and filled with the quiet confidence of people who respected the mountains they sought to climb. The journey was meant to be a celebration, a culmination of Aidan and Lena's shared passion, and a welcome for Chloe into their world of vertical landscapes. The last time anyone heard from them was on the evening of September 8th, 2005. Aidan made a call to his father via satellite phone, his voice crackling with distance and the thin mountain air, but filled with an unmistakable warmth. He reported that they had successfully established their high camp at 17,000 feet, and that the weather was holding beautifully. He said Lena was already sketching the surrounding peaks in her journal, and that Chloe was in awe of the stark, icy beauty surrounding them. He promised to call again after their summit attempt in 2 days. It was a perfectly normal conversation, the kind that offers no premonition, no hint of the profound and permanent silence that was about to fall. The Frostveil Mountains are a place of brutal, unforgiving beauty. Located deep in the continent's interior, they are a jagged spine of granite and ice, notorious for their isolation and violently unpredictable weather systems. The range is a vast wilderness, a landscape indifferent to human ambition, where storms can materialize from a clear sky in under an hour, and winds can reach speeds capable of tearing a tent from its moorings. It is a place where a simple misstep, a wrong turn, or a sudden drop in temperature can be the final mistake. It was into this magnificent and perilous theater that the 3 climbers had ventured, confident in their skills and equipment, unaware that the greatest danger they faced was not the mountain itself, but something far more patient and monstrous. The 9th of September passed without a call. The 10th, the scheduled day of their return from the summit, also brought only silence. At first, the families held on to rational explanations. Perhaps the satellite phone's battery had died, or they were taking an extra day to wait out a patch of bad weather. Aidan was cautious. He would never take an unnecessary risk. But as the 11th of September dawned with no word, a knot of unease began to tighten. By that afternoon, The quiet concern had curdled into a cold, sharp-edged fear. Lena and Aiden's parents, after a series of frantic, unanswered calls to the satellite phone, contacted the regional authorities. The search for Aiden Croft, Lena Petrova, and Chloe Petrova officially began. The scale of the operation was immense, a testament to the desperate hope of finding the trio alive. The Regional Search and Rescue Division mobilized ground teams of experienced mountaineers, while helicopters sliced through the thin air, their rotors beating a hopeful rhythm against the vast silence of the peaks. They focused their efforts on the climbers' planned route up Mount Boreas, scanning the immense glaciers, crevasses, and rock faces for any sign of life, any splash of color from a jacket or a tent against the monochrome landscape of rock and snow. The search was a grueling, frustrating ordeal. The terrain was incredibly difficult, and the weather, which had been so cooperative for the climbers, turned against the rescuers with a vengeance, grounding the helicopters for long stretches and burying the landscape under fresh layers of snow. The mountain that had promised a beautiful adventure was now actively hindering the effort to find them. As days bled into a week, the initial theories of a simple accident were scrutinized. Could they have fallen into a crevasse? It was possible, but Aiden was known for his rigorous safety protocols on glaciers. An avalanche? The snowpack in the area was stable, and there were no signs of any recent major slides along their intended path. Did they simply get lost? Lena was a professional cartographer with state-of-the-art GPS equipment. It seemed highly improbable. The authorities also investigated the possibility that they had chosen to disappear, but this was quickly dismissed. Their bank accounts were untouched. Their apartment was left as if they intended to return in a week, and their families were adamant that they would never abandon their lives and inflict such pain willingly. The search continued for 3 agonizing weeks, a race against the encroaching winter and fading hope. Ground teams risked their own lives navigating the treacherous terrain, shouting the climbers' names into the wind, their voices swallowed by the sheer scale of the wilderness. But they found nothing. Not a single footprint, not a discarded glove, not a dropped piece of equipment. It was as if the mountain had opened its maw and swallowed them whole, leaving no evidence of their passing. With the season's first major blizzard bearing down, the official search was called off. The families were devastated, left with a gaping wound of uncertainty. Their loved ones were not confirmed dead, but simply gone, lost to the vast, indifferent emptiness of the Frostveil Mountains. Hope, however, is a stubborn ember. For 2 more years, the families funded private searches, hiring some of the world's most elite alpine rescue specialists. These smaller, more targeted expeditions returned to the mountain as soon as the spring thaw allowed, combing the area with a grim determination. They, too, found nothing. The mystery only deepened. How could 3 people, with all their equipment, vanish so completely from a known route on a well-documented mountain? The lack of any evidence was confounding. It defied logic and fed a growing sense of despair. The active search for the climbers eventually ceased, and their story began its slow, sad transition from a current tragedy into a cautionary tale, a piece of dark local folklore whispered among a new generation of climbers. 19 years passed. The world changed, but the Frostveil Mountains remained a constant, their peaks unmoved, their glaciers continuing their slow, inexorable retreat. The story of the lost climbers became a cold case, a dusty file in a cabinet filled with unanswered questions. The parents of Aiden, Lena, and Chloe grew older, their grief a constant quiet companion, the pain of not knowing a wound that could never truly heal. They were left to imagine their children's final moments, a torturous cycle of scenarios ranging from a sudden, merciful accident to a slow, desperate battle for survival. The mountain held its secret, locked away beneath years of accumulated ice and snow, until the summer of 2024, when climate change offered a clue that 19 years of searching could not. A team of glaciologists was conducting a survey on the Boreas Glacier, documenting the dramatic effects of a warming planet. The glacier had receded by more than 200 vertical feet since 2005. exposing rock and terrain that had been entombed in ice for centuries. As they traversed a newly uncovered section of the glacial basin, one of the researchers spotted a patch of faded blue nylon fluttering against the gray scree. It was the tent. The discovery sent a shockwave through the quiet, forgotten case. A forensic team was flown in by helicopter, setting up a perimeter around the site as if it were a fresh crime scene. And, in a way, it was. The preservation was astonishing. The thin, high-altitude air and the deep freeze of the ice had created a time capsule. The scene inside the tent was a portrait of interrupted life. 2 sleeping bags were laid out side by side, another at their feet. An open book, a collection of poems, rested on one of the sleeping bags. A small gas stove stood in the vestibule, and on it a pot of what was later identified as a lentil stew, flash-frozen mid-simmer. 4 bowls and spoons were laid out, ready for a meal that was never eaten. The climbers' packs were inside the tent, partially unpacked but still containing their climbing harnesses, ropes, ice axes, and emergency supplies. Their heavy-grade mountaineering boots were neatly placed by the entrance. The only things missing were the climbers themselves and the lightweight trail shoes they likely wore around camp. The scene screamed of a sudden panicked flight. Something had happened, something so terrifying that it had caused 3 experienced people to abandon their only source of warmth, shelter, and survival gear, and run out into a sub-zero night wearing little more than their base layers and light shoes. What could it have been? The discovery officially reopened the cold case, which was now treated as a potential homicide. The lead investigator, a detective named Isabella Rossi, was haunted by the scene at the campsite. An animal attack was ruled out. There were no rips or tears in the tent, no signs of a struggle. An avalanche or rockfall was also dismissed. The tent was in a sheltered location and was completely undamaged. Rossi believed the cause of their flight was human. But who else could have been at 17,000 feet in that remote wilderness? The investigation began not on the mountain, but in the dusty archives of the original 2005 case file. Rossi and her team spent weeks poring over every witness statement, every search team report, and every dead-end lead, looking for anything that might have been missed. Deep within the supplemental files, they found a brief, dismissed report. A park ranger had interviewed a reclusive local man named Silas Croft a few weeks after the climber's disappearance. Croft, who was in his late 50s at the time and lived in a dilapidated cabin on the far edge of the national park boundary, had made a rambling complaint about trespassers and city folk disturbing his solitude. The ranger had noted that Croft was eccentric and paranoid, but ultimately harmless, and the lead was dropped. The name, Croft, was the same as Aiden's, but investigators quickly confirmed there was no relation. It was a strange, unsettling coincidence. Rossi, guided by a detective's intuition, decided this forgotten thread was worth pulling. Silas Croft, now in his late 70s, still lived in the same isolated cabin, a relic from a bygone era of prospectors and trappers who lived off the grid. When Detective Rossi and a fellow officer drove the long, unpaved track to Silas Croft's property, they found a place that seemed frozen in time. The cabin was weathered and gray, leaning slightly, with stacks of firewood piled high against its walls. Junk and rusted pieces of old mining equipment littered the yard. An old, rheumy-eyed dog chained to the porch let out a low growl. Silas Croft emerged from the cabin, a tall, gaunt figure with a wild mane of white hair and a pale, suspicious glare. He was hostile and uncooperative, denying any memory of the climbers and warning the detectives to get off his land. His profound animosity towards outsiders, even after 2 decades, was palpable. Rossi left that day with a growing certainty that Croft was hiding something. The challenge was finding proof. Rossi's team dug into Croft's history. He had purchased his 40-acre plot of land bordering the national park in the 1970s and had lived there ever since, a local hermit known for his solitary nature and occasional paranoid outbursts in the nearest town. He had no criminal record, but several old property disputes with the Park Service revealed a man who considered the surrounding wilderness his private domain. The most crucial piece of information came from a retired park ranger who recalled that Croft was a self-taught geologist and amateur demolitions expert who had spent years exploring the region's hundreds of abandoned silver and copper mines, many of which were not on any official map. A chilling theory began to form in Rossi's mind. Croft had the knowledge and the means to make 3 bodies disappear forever. Based on his past behavior and his extreme reaction to their visit, Rossi was able to secure a search warrant for his property. The raid on Silas Croft's cabin was a quiet, tense affair. The old man sat on his porch under police supervision, his face a mask of cold fury, while a team of investigators carefully picked through the decades of accumulated clutter inside his home. The cabin was a hoarder's nest, filled with geological maps, mining texts, and strange, handmade contraptions. For hours, the search yielded nothing but dust and decay. Then, in a small, locked footlocker, tucked away under a loose floorboard in the bedroom, they found it. It was not a weapon or a piece of climbing gear. It was a small, weatherproof digital camera, a model that was common in the early 2000s. The battery was long dead, but the memory card was still inside. The forensic lab managed to recover the contents of the memory card. The first 24 photos were exactly what they expected. Breathtaking images of the Frostveil Mountains, shots of Lena and Aiden smiling at the camera, a selfie of Chloe with a snow-capped peak behind her. They were the happy, hopeful images of a dream adventure. Then there was the final photograph. It was time-stamped 11:34 p.m. on the night of September 8, 2005. The image was dark, chaotic, and clearly taken in a moment of terror. It was a blurry shot from inside the tent, looking out through the open flap into the pitch-black, snowy night. At the extreme edge of the flash's range, 2 small points of light were faintly visible, like the eyes of some nocturnal animal. But they were too high off the ground, too steady, and too perfectly symmetrical. The photo was the last record of Chloe Petrova's life, a panicked snapshot of the unknown horror that had appeared outside their tent. Faced with the undeniable evidence of the camera, Silas Croft finally broke his silence. He was brought into an interrogation room, and with a chilling lack of emotion, he confessed. His story was one of profound paranoia and a twisted sense of ownership over the wilderness. He told the investigators that he had been observing the climbers for 2 days through a high-powered spotting scope from a ridge overlooking their camp. He saw them as invaders, representatives of a world he had abandoned and despised, defiling his sacred mountain with their presence. His motive was not robbery or rage, but a cold, calculated desire to remove them, to reclaim his solitude. The banal evil of his reasoning was more shocking than any crime of passion could have been. On that clear, cold night, he had put his monstrous plan into action. Using his intimate knowledge of the area's acoustics, he had positioned himself on the cliffs above their camp. He used a series of large, strategically placed metal sheets and a powerful, custom-built sound horn to create a terrifying, unearthly cacophony. He designed the sound to mimic a combination of a roaring avalanche and a monstrous creature, an elemental, predatory noise that would bypass rational thought and trigger a primal fight-or-flight response. He knew that in the disorienting darkness, the climbers would not stop to reason. They would simply run. He watched as the tent flap flew open and 3 panicked figures scrambled out into the freezing night, wearing only their light camp clothes, and fled downhill, away from the terrifying sound. They had done exactly as he had planned. Once they were away from the relative safety of their camp, he stalked them through the darkness. Disoriented, freezing, and clad in gear utterly inadequate for the conditions, they were easy prey. He hunted them down one by one in the merciless cold, his actions clinical and efficient. He offered no specific details of their final moments, his narrative remaining detached and cold. After they had succumbed to the elements and his quiet violence, he carried their bodies, one by one, to the shaft of an old, unmapped silver mine he had discovered decades earlier. He dropped them into the darkness, a vertical tomb over 500 feet deep, before covering the entrance with rocks and brush, erasing them from the world. He then returned to their camp. His only prize, the small camera, he took as a memento, a trophy from his successful defense of the mountain. In 2025, Silas Croft was put on trial. The camera, his confession, and the corroborating evidence from the retired park ranger painted a damning picture. He was found guilty on 3 counts of first-degree murder. The judge, citing the extreme and calculated cruelty of his actions, sentenced him to 3 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The legal outcome provided a definitive end to the 19-year-old mystery, but for the families, it was a hollow victory. The truth was more monstrous than anything they had imagined. Their children had not been lost to the majesty of the mountain, but had been murdered by the petty, paranoid grievance of a single, hateful man. The tragedy of the Frostveil climbers serves as a chilling reminder that the greatest dangers are often not the forces of nature, but the hidden darkness within human hearts. Aidan Croft, Lena Petrova, and Chloe Petrova went into the wilderness seeking beauty and found instead a senseless, banal evil lurking in the solitude. Their perfectly preserved campsite, a scene of life interrupted, stands as a haunting memorial to their final, terrifying moments. A testament to 3 vibrant lives extinguished not by a fall or a storm, but by the cold, quiet cruelty of a man who believed a mountain was worth more than a human life.